All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our presentation today on managing difficult emotions. My name is Casey Saylor, and I am the Older Adult Project Manager for the Mental Health Association of Maryland. And MHAMD has been around for over 100 years, addressing the mental health needs of Marylanders of all ages through educational programs like this, advancing public policy in our state's capital, and monitoring the quality of behavioral health services throughout the state as well through our consumer quality team. Just to name a few of the things that MHAMD is active in. If you're interested in learning more about the Mental Health Association of Maryland or accessing any of our free events or publications, I invite you to check out our webpage, mhamd.org. All right, and I mentioned I'm joining you from our older adult programs, and that is Older Adults Vibrant Minds. And we have our own special webpage focused on aging and the brain. And if you have not had an opportunity to check it out yet, I want to invite you to head over to mdaging.org. And there's tons of information about how aging impacts the brain, vice versa. And on the right-hand side of the slide here, you see a woman on a paddleboard. That is the cover of our Mental Health in Later Life guidebook. This is a wonderful free publication that MHAMD offers for older Marylanders and the people who care for them. It has so much great information about aging and the brain. I highly recommend, if you don't have one yet, please head to mdaging.org and request a copy or request a box and share it with your network and the people that you know. It is a wonderful publication. You can also download it from that page as well. All right, so I want to start our time together today with one of my favorite poems. This is The Guest House by Rumi, and I'll read it aloud for us now. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house, empty of its furniture. Still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. So I want to pause and ask for any, thoughts or feelings attached to this poem. Have you ever heard it before? Is this your first time? How does this land with you?
I interpret it as be open-minded.
Be open-minded. Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, this is Mary. I haven't heard the poem before. It's a lovely poem, though. Thanks for reading it. But I have heard that everyone comes into our life for a reason, to teach us something. And if we don't learn the lesson, then more people come until we learn it. So that's what it meant to me.
So you see a parallel where the emotions can show up in the same way, and there is something to learn from them. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome, thank you. For me, this poem, every time I read it, it's just a reminder that, just like I would, welcome someone into my home, my emotions are kind of stopping in to say hi too. And they'll leave. They won't stay forever. They'll leave and go about their way, but they're here visiting, like a guest. that's a reminder that it always brings me. So our negative emotions are designed to keep us safe and to motivate us to improve our lives, just like positive emotions do, right? For example, feelings of anger and anxiety can show us that something needs to change. Something about this that is causing these emotions is making me uncomfortable and needs to change. And maybe my well-being in this moment is being threatened, and my emotions are trying to tell me that. Fear is an appeal to increase our level of safety. Is our body, physically saying in our brains, like, something needs to change. We need to move, get out of this situation, whatever it may be. I don't feel safe. Resentment and frustration can motivate us to change something in a relationship. And our negative emotions are there to alert us that something needs to change and to be a motivator to make that change. I don't know about you, but when I experience something uncomfortable, I'm uncomfortable, right? I don't want to just sit in that most of the time. I want to do something to make it go away, or make it change, right? And that is that motivation in that moment, trying to propel me forward. Now, in that vein of make it go away, there are many different ways that we as humans try to do that, right? Some of them are healthier than others. A go-to for a lot of people may be drinking or drugs to try to mute the feeling. Maybe we distract ourselves, right? Put on that TV show so I don't have to think about what's in my head and what's in my body. And we're going to talk about a bunch of different strategies today. And as that poem illustrated a bit earlier, the idea is not that we need to run from these. It's that they're coming to visit and to receive them. And it takes practice and patience to be able to develop that skill. But it is something we can do. And the first step in doing that is to actually notice what we're feeling. How often throughout your daily life do you actually pause and check in and ask yourself, how am I feeling right now? I can say for myself, oftentimes I go throughout my day and maybe I just have a sinking feeling in my chest all day, but I never really stopped to notice it and identify, maybe why it's there. I just know that I'm having a bad day. And maybe I, take that out on someone I love. Maybe I'm a little snippy in my emails, but it's impacting me, whether or not I pause to notice it. And our power comes in pausing to notice. So I want to invite us to take a deep breath and check in with your brain and body. Right here in this moment is a good place to start. And ask yourself, how do you feel right now? And, sometimes it can be difficult because we may not have the words to describe the emotion. The English language is not very good at having words to describe complex feelings. And I have a tool in a moment that may be helpful for that. But a easier place to start for many of us is, how do I feel in this moment in my body, right? Maybe I have a tight spot in my chest. Maybe I notice my shoulders are kind of tight, or there's an ache in my neck. These are all a place to start too. And as you start to notice one thing, chances are you'll start to notice other things. What else are you noticing in this moment? Are there any other things? Oh, that ringing in my right ear, right? Are there any other things that are going on in your body or emotionally right now that you haven't noticed before you paused? And as you start to get more comfortable with this process of pausing and just noticing where you are in this moment, we could start asking questions about perhaps the cause of the emotion. What happened? What's affecting me in this moment, right? Where did that tightness in my chest come from? Oh, I have a big report due this week. That's probably what that underlying tightness is, right? And pausing and checking in with what may be the cause of that. And maybe it's not clear, and that's fine. But just pausing, posing the question, seeing what comes up. Now, I mentioned that the English language isn't always great at having the words to identify what we're feeling. So a helpful tool for guiding us through this process is something called an emotion wheel. And emotion wheels look like, this is one example on the screen here. And this one actually is split into comfortable emotions on the right and uncomfortable emotions on the left. So if you need one tool to kind of touch base with where you're at in this moment, pretty simply, this is a good one to start with. Now, how do you use this thing? You start in the center, right? So if we take a look right in the center, you see uncomfortable and comfortable. So as I check in, I can just start there. How does this emotion feel right now? Is it something that I'm enjoying, or do I really want to get away from it right now? And once you identify that, well, let's say it's a comfortable emotion, you go out to the next layer and take a look at those categories. Would I say that I'm feeling loving, excited, interested, confident, accepted right now? And I'm going to say I'm feeling excited. I'm here with all of you, and I am a bit amped up. I'm excited to be here. And then you go out to the next layer, that third layer, and it gives you some options of different, kind of tones that excitement can take. And check in with each of those. Does it feel right that what you're experiencing is passionate or surprised, eager, awed? And just kind of receive those and check in. Is this what I'm feeling in this moment? And maybe they're not. And if they're not, if none of those quite feel right, that's a place to start too. I'm feeling passionate in this moment because I enjoy this material, but that doesn't quite cover it all. I'm also, as I check in, a little fearful of public speaking in front of all of you. That's going on in the background. But because I acknowledge the passionate, I was able to say, that doesn't quite cover it all, right? It's a step-by-step kind of process that this can help guide us through. So this emotion wheel and more iterations, there are larger ones that zoom in on comfortable emotions. There are larger ones that zoom in on uncomfortable emotions. This is a free resource that you can access at humansystems.co/emotion wheels. And you can download them right from the website. So we practiced naming our emotions, identifying them. The next step, once we have some names and we're starting to put some names to what we're feeling, is to practice curiosity. Why am I feeling this way? What is this feeling trying to tell me? And what can I learn from this experience in this moment? Going back to the guest house poem, the idea that every emotion that steps up to our door has something to impart. And maybe you ask the question at first and there's not an answer. That's perfectly fine. Curiosity takes practice. And, our society does not empower us to pause very often. Our society is not one that encourages us to stop, check in with our emotions, express them to other people, right? When I ask you how you're doing today, 9 times out of 10, I'm probably expecting you to say, fine, how are you? I say, fine, great, polite interaction over. Our society doesn't actually want to talk about these things a lot of the time, which is unfortunate. And it impacts the way that we relate to our own emotions, right? We just want to be fine, perhaps. Or we just want to have a quick transactional emotion. It's like, okay, glad that's over. But our emotions don't quite work that way, especially if there is a stimuli that is ongoing, right, in our lives. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. At the end of the day, we are all humans who experience a spectrum of emotions, and I am no different than you. Our stimuli may be different. The things that cause us to feel emotions might be different, but the spectrum of human emotion is common. And it is perfectly normal for us to feel emotions, even though our culture may tell us otherwise. One way that, if it feels a bit uncomfortable for you to actually feel your feelings, full disclosure, it was very uncomfortable for me at first. I grew up in a family that didn't talk about emotions. That's just not what we did. Something that I found helpful was, if I'm feeling perhaps a bit fearful in this moment, instead of brushing it off, oh, you shouldn't feel that way, I would pause and say, of course I'm feeling fearful. I'm in front of how many people right now? That's a normal reaction. Or of course I'm feeling fill in the blank. Just pausing to validate for yourself with that kind of internal self-talk, like, yes, this is real right now. And perhaps you didn't come from a background where other people did that for you. That's something you can do for yourself. And in the true spirit of the guest house poem as well, thanking the emotions for spending time with you. For a lot of us, we spend so much of our lives pushing emotions away, right? I don't want to feel this right now. I'm going to distract myself by going over here. Let me talk to so-and-so so I get this thought out of my head. It takes practice for us to feel those things. And, one way we can honor the fact that, hey, I paused to do this. Thank you, fear, for letting me know that you're here. And I know it sounds a little silly. And, I'll just mention that there is a shift that can happen in our emotional states when we actually pause to acknowledge the things that we're feeling and honor them, like the guests in the guest house. Now, let's say thanking them, that's not your thing, that's fine. I'm just throwing some tools out here. Take what you want, leave what you want, that's up to you. Visualization is a wonderful tool for dealing with emotions as well. I know for myself, when I feel an emotion, particularly one that's difficult, it feels like it's right here. It's right in front of my face. It's the only thing I can see right now. It's close and overwhelming. And sometimes if it's an anxiety-producing emotion, I feel like I can't breathe. It's right there and in my face. And that is a great example of a time where creating space can be useful. And this can help us from feeling overwhelmed, or help us to back away. If we're already feeling overwhelmed, help us to back away a bit from that overwhelm. So some questions to help get the wheels turning for that exercise is, ask yourself, where is this emotion in relation to me right now? Now, don't get caught up in the details of, well, I am me and my emotion is in me. So no, don't do that. Just, kind of ask the question, where does it feel like this is right now? Like I said, for me, it feels like it's right here in front of my face. I can't really see through it. Once you get a feel for where it is, just ask it to take a step back. Hey, fear, can you just take one step back? And actually, in your mind's eye, imagine it moving from right here to a step away. Just visualize that step. And maybe you ask the question, it doesn't move. Ask it again and just keep trying to visualize that step, it physically moving away from you. And check in with yourself. Does that feel a little better? Could you use a bit more space? If so, ask it to take another step. And as you start to get a knack for this, because this is something that takes a bit of practice, I know it did for me. I can say for myself, there are some emotions that are too big, and I just feel like they need to be in the grocery store parking lot across town. I don't want them any closer to me than that when I'm feeling them. And so I imagine them over there, and it makes them not as overwhelming, right? Now, when that emotion pops up and I feel overwhelmed, it's like, okay, can you please take a step back? And I gradually walk it back to that grocery store. And then by the time it gets there, so to say, I have some space. And as Dan mentioned, I begin to return to that thinking part of the brain. Another visualization tool is imagining emotions like the clouds, always present and passing by, but separate from you, right? This is something that I've heard has been helpful for folks is, you know, if you're experiencing a big emotion like grief or sadness or fear, you know, imagine it high above you. High above you, it's present. You're not pretending it's not there, but there's some distance between you and it. And just like the clouds, continue moving. This too will continue moving and pass by. Inviting the emotion to leave is also a visualization that you can practice. You can visualize it walking out a door or into another room or a relaxing space. For me, I pull up a chair for that thing at the grocery store and that's where it stays for a while, just so I can have some space. If the emotion doesn't want to leave, you know, we can let it know that we'll come back later to spend some time with it if that's what it needs. And that last line is particularly useful. Perhaps you're busy with something. We don't always have time, or it's not always a good time to feel hard emotions, right? Maybe I'm driving and I can't cry right now, or whatever may be coming up. That's letting it know, I see you, I need you to come back later, can be a way to kind of help it step aside for the moment if you have something else you need to deal with. So there are actually some benefits to our brains and bodies from processing negative emotions. One of these benefits is self-awareness. Becoming more self-aware of our emotions can help us to talk about them, right? Especially if we're going through the process to name what we are, suddenly we have names to talk about. And it can help us to resolve conflicts when we're able to name these things more clearly. We can learn to tolerate and eventually manage uncomfortable feelings. I know, like I said, it probably sounds a little strange to be talking to your emotions, but it's one way of creating that space and movement that can help us to feel more comfortable with uncomfortable things. Processing negative emotions also helps us to decrease our reactivity. The idea of I will respond to what's going on, not react. Reacting is involuntary in a lot of regards, right? Like the doctor kind of touching your knee with a hammer and you kick, that's a reaction. Responding involves choice. So we can pause, and with that pause, we are choosing how to respond. And processing our negative emotions also strengthens our resiliency. It helps us to respond better to challenging things across the board in our lives, not just emotions. So if you really connected with some of the ideas I was sharing with the visualization or you know, the kind of conversation with emotions, I want to invite you to check out Focusing Meditation at focusing.org. That is something that they really dive into and practice. If that is not something that you identify with, we have some more stuff coming up. So maybe that will be more useful. So brain chemicals are definitely at play with our emotions, right? And something I want to touch on is the idea of nutrition, food, and how it impacts our moods. Unhealthy eating patterns are known to cause mood swings, and this is often caused by fluctuations in our blood sugar, nutritional imbalances. Skipping meals, especially breakfast, can result in us feeling weak and tired because of low blood sugar, just a natural reaction in our body. If we eat in a way that cuts out entire food groups, it can make it more difficult for us to get essential nutrients. And you know, low levels of certain nutrients like zinc, iron, magnesium, vitamin D, omega-3 fatty acids, these are all associated with feelings of worsening mood and decreased energy. And on the flip side, eating too many refined carbohydrates such as white bread, pastries, can cause your blood sugar to rise and fall rapidly. And that can actually, in our mood, lead to low energy and irritability. So I share this with you because I know for myself, comfort food was something I grew up with. And my comfort foods typically include a number of the things on this list that research has shown are not helpful. They actually negatively impact our moods and can cause us to feel worse. So we still have much to learn research-wise of the effects of how our dietary patterns impact our mental health. But evidence across the board is suggesting that eating a healthy diet can have a protective effect on our mental well-being. In fact, many scientists believe that good nutrition is as important to our mental health as good nutrition is to physical health. So here are some positive changes that you could make to help your diet support your mood and mental wellness. Eating at set intervals throughout the day, choosing less refined sugars, and eating more whole grains. Include a protein at each meal and eat a variety of foods. Get nutrition from all different areas. Include omega-3 rich foods in your diets and reach and maintain a healthy weight. Drink plenty of fluids, especially water. I know for myself, I get irritable when I am dehydrated. That impacts my mood as well. And getting regular exercise. Research actually shows that exercise helps us to regulate our cortisol levels. And cortisol is the stress hormone. The stress hormone is designed to let us know when we're in danger, right? Stress can be defined as the brain's response to any demand, and many things can trigger this cortisol response in our brains, including change. Now, in early, evolution, this cortisol hormone was designed to let us know when we're in danger. Stress would typically happen when a tiger showed up, or we were, in a life-threatening situation. Those were the primary causes of stress then. Now in our modern society, there's not so much a tiger in the bush, but maybe my phone is ringing and it's someone I really don't want to talk to, right? We have some different stress triggers in our lives today, but that even though the cause is different, the impact is the same. That cortisol still floods into our system and it turns on our fight or flight response. And whether I mentioned that stress is related to change, it can be a positive change that happens, maybe the birth of a new child. It could be a negative change, a job loss. It could be a real change or maybe one that's perceived. Maybe it's something that's recurring. It keeps happening, i.e. our daily commute. It could be a relatively harmless change, like watching a scary movie, or maybe it's something really serious, like a divorce or a serious illness or a car accident. And this also includes living through a pandemic and all the changes that we have experienced along the way. So in our human bodies, we all are experiencing this cortisol hormone, but according to the APA, nearly 70% of Americans experience physical and mental symptoms of stress, but only 37% think that they're doing really well at managing it. Right? So that is illustrating a lot of people saying, I'm stressed right now, but not a lot of people saying, I'm doing okay with this right now. So when our stress levels are high, we can experience symptoms such as fatigue, moodiness, muscle tension, right? That tightness in our chest or shoulders, trouble sleeping, overeating or not eating enough, anger or irritability. Maybe we feel overwhelmed, or again, that alcohol or drugs come in to try to make us feel better. Maybe we don't feel like we can relax no matter how hard we try, or we're seeing some changes in relationships. Maybe, you identify with just a couple of these. Maybe you identify with many. We all react to stress differently. We all have the cortisol hormone, but we all react a bit differently. And maybe the way that we react in one year in our lives is different than the way that we react another year. I think we've all seen that at different stages in the pandemic. Maybe we're reacting differently over the past 2 years. So we've been talking about cortisol levels, everyday stress, I want to highlight traumatic stress for a moment. As I mentioned before, major changes such as divorce, serious illness, car accident, and exposure to violence or poor living conditions can lead to traumatic stress reactions. This includes living through a pandemic as well. When our brains detect a threat, our bodies automatically begin the stress response. The cortisol releases, it prepares us to fight, flight, or freeze. And while these responses may be helpful in the moment, they can be troublesome if they persist when the danger is no longer present. Post-traumatic stress disorder, also known as PTSD, occurs when our physical sensations, thoughts, and behaviors and feelings that are related to trauma become prolonged outside of the event and interfere with our daily activities, our relationships, and our quality of life. Now, it's important to note that what may be traumatic for one person may not be traumatic for another. Two people can experience the same situation and react very differently, be impacted differently. It's natural to experience symptoms of traumatic stress for a few weeks after a dangerous event. That is our body trying to cope with it and get it through our system. But when symptoms last for more than a month, or they seriously affect our ability to function, they may be post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, here are some symptoms of PTSD, and I want to highlight that the COVID-19 pandemic is a traumatic event that has impacted everyone to some degree. However, like we said, what is traumatic for one person may not be for another, and some people, this is important, some people with PTSD do not show any symptoms for years after the traumatic event. So please, I invite you to look at these symptoms, see if you identify with any of these symptoms now. If you don't, please, keep this slide, check in with yourself periodically over the next months, years, as we continue to move through this pandemic, and check in with yourself and see if you align with more of these in the future. And if so, please reach out for help. PTSD can be accompanied by feelings of depression, substance use, or an anxiety disorder. So I mentioned help. And if you're worried or overwhelmed by your emotions or behavior, the easiest place to start is with talking to someone. This can just be a friend, someone you trust, a family member. Maybe you have a spiritual counselor, your primary care doctor, or your neighbor. These are all easy places to start. If you are interested in pursuing counseling, or there's medications, there's lots of different interventions for mental health conditions. I invite you to contact if you're working, your employer's HR department or employee assistance program for resources within your insurance network. Contact your insurance provider, call that number on the back of your card. That is the easiest, most straightforward way to be connected to care that is in your network. The Baltimore County Mental Health Authority can also be helpful, and they can give you a list of the local treatment resources. And maybe you don't want to talk to anyone, you can go to SAMHSA's Mental Health Treatment Facility Locator. Either call them or the link on the screen available in English and Spanish in order to find resources in your area. Now, another great resource that Maryland has to offer is the crisis hotline, 211, and then when you hear the prompt, press 1. And this is a great place to go if you need to talk to someone and you just don't know who to call. 911 doesn't feel right. You don't need a police officer to show up, but you need to talk to someone because you don't feel okay. And so 211, press 1 is our resource for that. And the word crisis, you'll hear when you call this is a crisis line. What does that mean? A mental health crisis can be defined as a time of intense difficulty, trouble, or danger, right? Maybe a really deep feeling of overwhelm. I need to talk to someone. I need to do something, but I don't know what. Call that number. Or maybe you feel unsafe. Maybe you feel like you can't control what you're feeling, or you might hurt yourself or someone else. 211, press 1. All right. I want to highlight as well that there is support specifically available for people who have survived a COVID infection. COVID Connect is a wonderful resource offered by the health departments at Maryland, and they actually offer virtual support groups for COVID survivors, for people to talk about, how they're doing after infection and to coping strategies, staying healthy, things like that. They talk about all kinds of helpful things. So if you haven't looked into COVID Connect yet, I encourage you just type COVID Connect Maryland into Google and it'll come right up for you. They also did a webinar series specifically on wellness topics around, again, supporting COVID survivors. I'm not sure if that's still going on at this time, but if it is, you'll see that there as well. Mental Health America writes that the COVID-19 pandemic has had a profound impact on the mental health of people of all ages. Now more than ever, it's critical to reduce the stigma around mental health struggles because that stigma often prevents individuals from seeking help. And I just want to highlight, we're talking about difficult emotions today, and difficult emotions can turn into a mental health struggle. We talked about PTSD, we talked about, difficulties with stress, things like that. There is no shame in if you feel yourself starting to move into those even more difficult emotions. There's no shame in asking for help because sometimes we need help to deal with them, and that's okay. So shifting gears a bit, I want to zoom in on stress in a moment, something called the amygdala hijack. So as we go throughout our daily lives, we process a lot of stimulation. And specifically in our brains, the stimuli is processed through the amygdala and the hippocampus. The hippocampus is responsible for storing our memories and navigating our automatic implicit reactions, positive and negative. The amygdala regulates our emotions and behavioral response, and it's connected to that fight or flight response. The amygdala is involved in detecting threats, triggering a body response, right? So if I touch a hot stove and I pull my arm back, that's my amygdala at work. My amygdala did that, pulled my arm right back. The amygdala is involved in fear conditioning, right? So maybe I got into a car accident, now I feel afraid to get in a car again. That's my amygdala saying, oh, this might not be safe, and trying to protect me. Our amygdala also helps us to process positive emotions and encodes our emotional memories. Maybe whenever you smell a vanilla candle, you think of your grandmother and something that she used to bake. That's your amygdala at work. The term amygdala hijack is coined by psychologist Daniel Goleman in his 1995 book, Emotional Intelligence, and it refers to an intense emotional reaction that is out of proportion to the circumstance. And essentially, when this happens, the rational brain is bypassed and signals are sent straight to our emotional brain. And then later, the thinking part of our brain catches up, so to say, and you may realize that your reaction was a bit over the top. Now, cortisol, in these moments, cortisol, that stress hormone, shows up too. And that even further dulls the communication between our prefrontal lobe, that thinking part of the brain, which is responsible for controlling our impulses. When we are feeling stressed, it is more difficult for our brain to control our impulses. That is just biologically what's going on. Now, if I'm drinking alcohol, that also makes it more difficult. So if I'm stressed and drinking alcohol, that's a double whammy. It's going to be even more difficult to control impulses and think clearly. So what kind of things trigger amygdala hijack? What are some examples of this? The amygdala hijack is a moment where you may look back and think, why in the world did I do that? This can include things like road rage, saying something you didn't mean in the heat of an argument. Maybe you win the lottery and your excitement makes you scream and cause a scene in the convenience store. Or you lose a tennis match and in your anger, you throw the racket across the court. Or maybe you have been trying to open this dumb can for 5 minutes and you're so angry and frustrated that you just slam it on the counter, right? Those are moments where the amygdala hijack has taken over. I want to invite folks, does anyone have any other examples of an amygdala hijack that you've experienced?
I do. You're driving and someone cuts you off and you wish you had a shotgun to blow them up. And then you realize that's certainly out of proportion.
Yep. Great example, Dan. Thank you. Any other examples? We all do this. Don't pretend you don't.
This is Ricardo. For me, it's traffic jams. It's driving in Philadelphia. And it comes on so quickly. I'm just hijacked. That's a great example. And I want to change it, but it seems so embedded in my behavior.
Got it. Thank you, Ricardo. And thank you, Dan. It can be vulnerable to actually name, what sets us off. But please rest assured, this is something we all experience. It's a natural way that our brain reacts in these moments. And Ricardo, I do have some tips in a couple minutes that maybe some of them will be helpful, because this is something we all will find helpful to learn to control a bit. Physically, in moments like Dan and Ricardo named, we may feel shaking. We may have increased blood pressure. Maybe our heart is racing, our breathing gets quicker. Maybe we feel really tense with our muscles or even a little sick to our stomachs. These are all physical symptoms of the amygdala hijack. And we touched on those. So we can learn to recognize, the first step, just like with the emotions, is recognizing when this amygdala surge is happening, when this amygdala hijack is happening. If we recognize it, we can calm down the amygdala, which will control the amount of cortisol in our system and keep us thinking clearly. This is possible. And I'll share with you a quick exercise. I have a couple more, but a quick exercise that you can do in those moments, right? When the amygdala hijack happens, we are zoomed in, tunnel vision on whatever, the reaction is in that moment. So we can ground, we can return ourselves to our surroundings and to our body, because chances are we're not feeling our body in that moment. We are just zoomed in on whatever our brains are on. And we can ground through the senses. So this is one of my favorite exercises. It goes easily 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and it leads us through the senses. So step by step, acknowledge 5 things that you can see around you. So if you're sitting in the car, you can see the steering wheel, the dashboard, the chair. Maybe you have a cute little thing hanging from your mirror and the check engine light's on. Right? Just name 5 things that you can see around you. Anything in your surroundings. And then take another step. Acknowledge 4 things that you can touch around you. It could be your hair, the clothing that you're wearing, a pillow, or your weight in the chair even, the ground under your feet. 4 things you can touch, you can feel. And then move to 3. Acknowledge 3 things you can hear. Any external sounds. Maybe your belly is rumbling, that counts. But you can also focus on things you hear outside of your body. Maybe in a traffic jam, you hear some horns. Name that as one. Don't need to avoid that. Maybe you hear your blinker, right? Just really notice 3 things you can hear. And then step to 2 things you can smell. Maybe, there's a pencil sharpener nearby, or you have an air freshener in your car, lotion, maybe you have some lotion in the glove box that you could pull out and take a whiff of. 2 things you can smell. And then 1 thing you can taste. What's the inside of your mouth taste like right now? Do you have a coffee that you've been drinking? Really notice that. Now, this is a technique that is useful for any kind of anxiety-inducing situation to help us ground. And like I said, it helps to ground us in our present moment when our mind is bouncing between things. So I want to invite folks, as I go through a couple other ideas that I'd like to share with you, please put in the chat any suggestions you have. How do you typically manage your difficult emotions? Please put any of those thoughts in the chat for everyone to see. Mindfulness is a particularly powerful tool. That 5-4-3-2-1 exercise I mentioned, that is a mindfulness practice that you can pull out at any point when you feel like you just need to reconnect and pull away from that anxiety-inducing moment. Mindfulness is really grounded in things like awareness, focus, acceptance, and observation. And mindfulness helps us to reduce stress. It actually is shown to improve our mood. It improves our brain function. It can help us to build our ability to focus, sharpen memory, and improve our mental performance when practiced over time. And it's actually shown to help us improve our ability to cope with pain, right? We've been talking about negative emotions. Pain is another element that can really color any of our emotional reactions. So people with chronic pain who practice mindfulness meditation have reported less severe pain and pain-related distress. So there, I'll just highlight really quickly, the sympathetic nervous system directs the body's rapid involuntary response to dangerous or stressful situations. This is another way of looking at the cortisol and the amygdala hijack, right? There's a lot of different systems in our bodies in play when these things are happening. But I really want to highlight the parasympathetic response system. This is the system, part of our nervous system that calms our bodies down. It helps us to conserve energy and restore the nervous system to a more relaxed, neutral, and efficient state of being. So as we go throughout our daily lives and encounter stressful situations, a lot of us live in that kind of stressed out, constant cortisol state. With practice, people can develop the parasympathetic response system to be their dominant state. Maybe you know someone and they just always seem cool as a cucumber. They may have really developed this parasympathetic response system. So a couple ways of activating our parasympathetic response system includes activities like grounding. It moves our focus from whatever's going on in our heads to the here and now. That 5-4-3-2-1 exercise is a great example of that. And most importantly, it reinforces for our body that we are safe. Pausing and doing this exercise, our brain may think, I don't have time for this, this isn't important, but just the act of doing it signals silently to our body that it is safe, and it helps to turn off that faucet of cortisol. And in turn, it reduces our feelings of distress and anxiety. We have grounding tools around us all the time, stress balls. Maybe you have a chenille stem or a paper clip that you just like to bend and play with. A rock, having the weight of a rock in your hand, just pick one up off the street and have a tactile reminder to feel and return you to something outside of yourself. Any tactile reminder will do. I've heard of folks who have a bracelet that they wear and they snap it against their skin whenever they need that tactile reminder. Lotion is another great tool. Whether you like scented or unscented, just the feeling, the tactile sensation of putting lotion on your hands and really feeling it, right? Every motion of where your hands touch, the heat that it generates, just really focusing on the physical sensations of applying lotion is a grounding tool. So we are coming up on the end of our time here. So I'll just quickly name that movement can be a mindful tool. And the key is that it's very, again, focused and observational. It can be as simple as focusing on your hand. make a fist, notice how it feels. The tightness in the back, right? The strain on your fingers, just really feel all the sensations. Open it slowly, feel your bones move, right? Feel everything move and just really follow those sensations as you open and close your fist. Journal writing is another activity that is shown to have health benefits, and it's very simple. You don't need a beautiful, huge journal. A simple little notepad will help that fits in your purse or your bag. And just set time aside each day to reflect. What are you struggling with? What's going well? The 8 dimensions of wellness can be a tool for helping to direct that. If you're someone, you're like, I don't know what to write about. But you also can use journaling in a million different ways, whether it's doodling, maybe you write about what you're doing today, a gratitude list. There are tons of ideas, but the real activity, the grounding mechanism is putting pen to paper and focusing on the activity of doing it. Breathing is another tool, just focusing on the movement of your breath as it goes in and out without trying to change it in any way. We breathe all day. How often do we actually notice that it's happening? Pause and feel it. If your mind starts to wander, and it will, gently bring it back and say, oh, I'm focusing on the breath right now. Body scans can be another useful tool, just similar to the fist, feeling the sensations, but it's throughout your whole body. Start at the tip of your head, notice the feeling and bring it down all the way to the soles of your feet. And if that's something that's new for you, I invite you to hop on YouTube and type guided body scan into YouTube. There are some great guided meditations to get you started with that. And lastly, eating can help to activate our parasympathetic nervous system response as well, because if we were unsafe, we wouldn't have time to eat right now, according to our nervous system, or drink. And so eating mindfully can be a wonderful grounding tool as well. Now, I want to name particularly that, we can use these tools when we notice that we are in amygdala hijack or feeling heightened, right? And if we can notice it, and then we can say, okay, what can I do to bring myself back down? And then pick one of these tools. And if we are going into a situation that we know may very likely result in amygdala hijack, like driving home, perhaps, maybe there's always a traffic jam on the same road, we can bring these grounding activities into the situation with us, right? So we can perhaps put a stress ball in the glove box, or get our favorite cup of coffee for the drive home to have that kind of parasympathetic nervous system interaction to help our bodies understand that they're actually safe in this moment. So I covered a lot of stuff today. I know that there's quite a bit to go through here. I will share a copy of these slides with everyone, and I invite you to consider, how can these tools not only be used in the moment, right, when we need them to calm down, but how can they be brought in to potentially triggering or anxiety-inducing moments to help us to cope with them better. So I will stop the recording and invite everyone to share anything that they would like to share.